And she came shooting round the corner and ran past me and was like, hi, and ran up the stairs. And I was like, there's me. That's amazing. Like, when I just say me, it's something I can't find. I don't end up there in meditation, but it's there. It's so fundamental and so, I can't find the words, profound and important and beautiful. So I was watching a few videos the other day about quantum gravity and science type things, and it put an idea in my head, a thought experiment which I ran with and proved very beneficial, and I thought it would be a brilliant thing to share on the stream. So, disclaimer, it doesn't necessarily mean that what I'm going to share is true or is the way it is. It's a thought experiment. But that said, I think this could work for anyone. Give it a go. It's not going to do anyone any harm. If anyone wanted to try and drill this into their mind, to do it more often as a habit, would take continual repetition. So there is going to be some amount of imagining oneself from a different perspective, and that may feel uncomfortable or maybe even threatening. But I'm saying, even if you wanted to go with that, it would need repeated attempts, and it would stop working. In my experience, when I have done this kinds of things before, when I've been meditating a lot, I would have a kind of a thought experiment and a way of looking at things, and then it would cease to work anymore, and I would come up with a new, better one. This may be especially effective for people like me who need to be convinced about why to let go. As in, some people who are perhaps a little bit more inclined to reasoning and intellect as opposed to emotions, or just being open and love devotional approaches, which is a big thing in Hinduism. But I do think it could be interesting for anyone to try. But if you're interested in non-duality already, then you're already there. So I'm quite new to non-duality and Advaita Vedanta. I've normally come at this from a Buddhist perspective, and from the Buddhist perspective, this is very similar to the first step of the Eightfold Path, which is right understanding. And ordinarily, the first time one meets the teaching of right understanding is like the reason to bother to practice at all. And then as practice continues, right understanding is revisited continuously, and that understanding is deepened. So it is point one, and it is an interesting thing to explore, reflect on. From the perspective of how we're going to approach the thought experiment and the kind of path that we're going to try and weave is from the self-reflection, intellectual thinking about, contemplating, but also dialing into our experience from that kind of route, which from the Buddhist perspective would ordinarily, if you were to follow the 4 foundations of mindfulness, start with going to the body and connecting with the body in the present moment, then move on to thoughts and feelings, particularly feelings, and understanding what's going on there and quietening down, and then moving on to perception. Whereas what we're going to do is try and use the intellect to go straight to perception. I've bumped into a few teachers of this type of approach now that since I've been interested in it, looking into it, and Ramana Maharshi, for example, does talk about and others the benefits of meditation in terms of quietening the body and mind. And I think that that is covered in Buddhism with that first mindfulness of the body, then mindfulness of feelings. So for anyone who's interested, tries it, finds that they're just like a bit too over the place, that's what that is. It's because the preliminary work on quietening the body and mind hasn't been done, and that is useful information to know what one can choose to look at instead. With that said, I've got a few videos lined up, and what we're going to do is prime it with some understanding of what non-duality is. And these are kind of the videos I was watching at the time and set the seed. Now, and I also want to say that like I said yesterday, have had a tooth infection, I believe a wisdom tooth coming through, and everything swelled, and my neck has been very tight. And for me too, right now, my body and mind is pretty hectic because it didn't like the pain. There was definitely an adverse reaction in me to the pain, to the tension in my neck. It's still not relaxed. It's starting to feel better. Absolutely, definitely feeling a lot better than it was on Sunday, but it's taking time for my mind and body to quieten back down again. So this for me is the first time revisiting this. This is something I was doing, I think, on Thursday and Friday, and was a very enjoyable way of seeing the world. It was very relaxing. Lots of stuff kind of fell away, and I'm really hoping by going through this here today with you guys and talking about it and watching these videos that I too will be able to move closer into experiencing this kind of perspective. I'm going to grab my headphones. As a light start with a funny video with some very profound points, I believe. So with that said, just need to double check on the... we're good to go.
YouTube video like binge right now. So it's my third in a row. I changed my shirt so it didn't look like I was making all these videos.
With a funny non-duality.
Right? And I have to be careful. I have to watch. I keep saying and like, so I'll try to not keep saying that. So this video is about how Advaita, and if you're watching the video, you know what Advaita is, right? Advaita is non-duality. Literally, I guess it means not two. So what Advaita says is that there is no separation. There is no separate self as apart from the world. Everything is really a unity. And what the common perception, which they say is a misperception, is that there's a separate self, an individual here, Dan, and Dan stands in contrast to the rest of the world, and everything is Dan or not Dan, Dan against this and that. Non-duality says, no, the self is an illusion. There is no self. Well, Advaita has it totally wrong, and the people who believe in a self, they're actually even closer to the truth, because it's not true that there's no self. In fact, there's a whole shitload of selves, right? Think about it. Haven't you had this internal dialogue before? You go to work, and you're in a pissy mood, so you say something rude to a coworker, right? You're mean to a coworker. Then you get home, and internally you say, oh, I'm so ashamed I acted like that at work, right? So now you've got two selves working. You got the self that was rude and pissy at work, and then you got the self that's critical of the self that was rude and pissy at work, right? Then later on, maybe you go back to work the next day and you apologize to the person. Then you're all proud of yourself. So now you got the self that is proud of the self, that was ashamed of the self, that was the pissy self, that was rude to the coworker, right? So now you got like 3 or 4 selves easily just in that one single day. And if you think about it, you have like a morning self, you got like an afternoon self, after I've had my first cup of coffee self, you have like a nighttime self, you've got a summer self, a winter self, there's all kinds of selves. The mind is doing nothing but spinning off all these selves, right? And that's why you can have these internal dialogues going back and forth, because there's a whole shitload of selves. Now they're all fake. They're all, because anything the mind makes is fake, right? and they have some use. In some ways they're practical. If you get too involved in all these separate cells, you become, delusional, paranoid, schizophrenic or something. Go on like a murder spree. But otherwise, during the course of our normal day, we got all kinds of selves going on. How can you be proud of yourself for doing something? Which is the self that's, proud, and which is the self that's being proud of? Which is which? And then you're ashamed of yourself for being proud of yourself because you should be more humble, right? So you got the ashamed self, and you got the proud self, and then you got the humble self, all going all over the place at once. So I hate to tell you guys that are into this Advaita non-duality stuff, you're wrong saying there's no self. There's a whole shitload of selves.
I love that little funny start. I'm not going to say too much. I'm just going to kind of leave that hanging. So, a whole shitload of selves. With that out of the way, why don't we jump into the first or the next video.
How do we know that we experience the real world? In fact, we probably don't. Everything that we perceive, everything that we experience is a result of the brain interpreting the sensory information that comes in a particular way. I'm Anil Seth. I'm a professor of neuroscience at the University of Sussex in the UK. Now, you could say that all of our experiences are all hallucinated. It's just that whenever we agree about what's out there, that's what we call reality. The brain brings to bear its prior expectations about what's out there in order to interpret this mass of noisy and ambiguous sensory information that it continually encounters. Perception, instead of just being a reflection of what's actually there in the world, is always this active process of interpretation. It's easy to assume that we see with our eyes. In fact, we see with our brains. Our eyes are of course necessary, but what we actually end up perceiving is much more a product of how our brain interprets all this information from the eyes, than the eyes being this window into an objective external reality. And
so this is a very short, condensed video as part of an article in Tech Insider. What I'm going to do, I'm going to share all these links under the video if you're watching on YouTube, and I may check them in chat on Twitch as well in a second if I can remember. And I've watched a longer talk by this, but what this is all about is the power of perception from the scientific perspective, that what we see isn't how things are. What we're seeing is more an experience that the brain has put together. And we're experiencing the brain's created experience rather than a being looking out into an objective, solid, external world or universe, or however you want to put it.
when the balance is disturbed between how the brain interprets sensory information and what the sensory information actually is, well, that's when people start to see things that other people don't, and that's what we call hallucination. When you look at a cloud, and sometimes you can see faces in clouds, now that's a kind of hallucination. Other people who will see things that really other people don't see, that's just a different balance that they have between how their prior expectations influence the sensory data that comes in. Another aspect of this is, when you take things like psychedelic drugs, that also leads people to have unusual experiences, to see things that aren't there. Again, it doesn't mean that these things really exist, it just means that your brain is working in a different way so that its prior expectations come to dominate the sensory information. We can see a number of things that happen in the brain on psychedelics. One of the things that happens is the brain generally becomes a bit more disorganized. Normally in the brain, different parts of the brain have activity that correlates. So we see all these networks in the brain where different areas are active at the same time, and then they diminish their activity at the same time as well. How visual hallucinations in the psychedelic state might come about. It could be that in the psychedelic state, what you perceive is dependent more on the brain than the sensory data that's coming in through the eyes and the ears.
So what we're doing here, this is a really good primer to, as we move forward and look at these other ideas. For me, this science built a very encouraging rationality to entertaining the thought experiment, because to looking at things differently, because we all believe the world to be as it is, and some people who are interested in non-duality, who are interested in the spiritual path, or people with mental health issues, which is how I came at it, who see the world a certain way and is very unpleasant, may reach a point where it's like, this can't go on, there must be another way. That the willingness to go, the way I see the world is coming in part from me, and there's something inside that I might be able to address in order to see the world in a different way, which causes less suffering.
And we have the opportunity now to try to characterize exactly how and why this happens. But what we experience as being real is a construction of the brain. So when I experience a particular color, that doesn't mean that color exists out there in the universe, that a red mug is actually painted some color that exists independently of my mind and brain. No, red is something that my brain constructs in order to interpret visual information. This leads to the question, is anything real? Is anything really there?
So the main point he was making there, I'm sure you've picked it up yourselves, but I'm just going to summarize for the sake of taking us on this journey through this thought experiment, is that the experience we have is largely the experience of the brain constructing the experience from fairly limited sense data. For example, our eyes can only see a limited amount of the light spectrum. Our ears can only hear limited amounts of sound spectrum. Everybody knows dogs can hear sounds that humans can't. Dogs can smell smells that humans can't. So in some ways, the experience that I have as a human is different to the experience that a dog has, because it has these wider ranges, which kind of means that my experience isn't what is real. And the word is used a lot in this article and in that video is hallucination. He's done talks. Do look him up if you want to, if you're interested in these kinds of things. So the next video I watched was about quantum gravity, and I didn't watch this as an order, I just happened to be watching it. So I don't know how much people are interested in the science, and I don't know much about the science. I'm terrible at mathematics, so I don't understand from any deep, real scientific perspective at all. But what I will share is that we know in relativity that the speed of time is different depending on gravity, and the speed of time is like our experience. So the speed of which our experience goes, which is causality as well, changes because of gravity. Gravity has a fundamental impact on space and time, bending it as well, obviously. And obviously there's a lot about the potential for consciousness and the observer and things like that. It's not proven, that's one interpretation of quantum physics, but there's been a lot of talk about how it would be great to unify relativity and quantum physics. And quantum gravity is a little kind of part of the attempt to unify it, and that's what this scientist is talking about in this talk. So with that said, let's jump in.
I think are adding up to a revolution. Okay, so where are we? The whole subject of quantum gravity probably goes back to the first day that anybody thought about quantum mechanics and thought about gravity. But the modern era of it, I think, started in 1958 or sometime around then, when theoretical physicists asked the question, should we quantize gravity? Now, what does quantize mean? Quantize was an expression which meant a procedure that you do on a classical system. The classical system could be a harmonic oscillator, it could be an atom, it could be electrodynamics, ordinary electrodynamics. A procedure which, if you know about that procedure, you recognize the equations. If not, it doesn't matter, there are equations. And the founders of the subject, Paul Dirac, Feynman, DeWitt, Weinberg, Wheeler, Hawking, their attempts were organized around trying to describe scattering processes, processes where particles come in and particles go out. They interact under the influence of gravity, and here and there they may emit some gravitational waves, gravitons. They invented Feynman diagrams for gravitation. Well, it was a disaster. It was a disaster.
So this is all a bit technical and potentially unnecessary for the thought experiment, but this is a really good background on the science that for me, on the intellectual level, convinced me that it's worth. What I don't want to do is imagine that my experience in the world and life is something that it's not, because in my experience and my background of mental health issues, I came to learn through cognitive behavioral therapy that believing things are a way that they're not caused me massive amounts of suffering, and CBT teaches people to identify what one's beliefs are and then challenge the beliefs. Is it really true? And this is where I'm at. I don't want to pick up anything that's not true. That's just so ingrained in me. But that can block change, because, you know, I didn't have this attention to detail and this mature adult brain when I formed my deepest beliefs that we all do in childhood and early teens, this sense of self. But I need some convincing nonetheless, and that's part of where the work is, finding good sources of information to challenge the beliefs in me that seem incredibly fundamental, and challenging one's perception of what we think this experience is, what we're experiencing, is absolutely fundamental at that level. And so that's why we look at the background. It also gives a bit of a background of what this talk's about. I'm going to share the link to that as well if anybody else is interested. Let's jump back in.
Everything they tried to compute came out infinite, or came out meaningless, came out nonsensical. And that led to what I would call an era of angst and confusion, a time when it just did not look as if quantum mechanics and gravity were compatible. Now, how could they not be compatible? They have to be compatible. The world has both, and we can't live in a world of inconsistency. And that was then. How do you fit them together? Can you fit them together? And it looked impossible. Today, the situation is different. Today, as far as we can tell, not only can gravity and quantum mechanics fit together, but it's almost as if they were the same thing, or two sides of a coin, a single coin. I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the things that went into that. All right, I always start with digressions. I'm a great digressor. I digress all the time. I'm going to digress about something you've all seen, holograms.
This is
what is a hologram? You've probably all seen them.
The
first holograms were something like this. you had a region inside a cavity of some sort, and the cavity was not a cavity, just a round region. And the cavity, the surface of the cavity, was a film, a photographic film. And if you looked carefully at that film, even through a microscope, all you would see was little scratchy, meaningless rubbish, noise. It seemed to encode nothing, nothing recognizable. On the other hand, if you shined light on it of the right kind, what is called coherent light, all of a sudden, voila, an image would form, but a three-dimensional image, right in the middle of this cavity, a three-dimensional image of whatever it was that had been photographed. What is a hologram? From an abstract point of view, a hologram is a two-dimensional mathematical representation of a three-dimensional portion of the world. Now, how do you manage to take a three-dimensional thing and map it into two dimensions? Well, it's possible, but it is always at the cost of the two-dimensional image looking like a random hash. How you put it back together again, that may be just shining light on it, or it may be some much more complicated mathematical procedure. But that's what a hologram is. And what you can say about a hologram is that things are not where you think they are in the hologram. The information, let's call it the information of what is in the hologram is in the film. The image is in the bulk, what we today call the bulk. Things, or the information encoding things, are not where you think they are. I want you to keep that in mind.
I would have liked to look more deeply into how holograms are made for the purpose of this, but this was more than enough for me to take these points on board and play with them in my mind. The idea of our experience being a hallucination is a kind of important point one, and important point two here is where the location of the information, where that information is coming from.
Now let's come back to quantum gravity. In the 1990s, this was the period when Stephen Hawking and I were having our fun debating, and Raphael was a student. Thought experiments, principally initiated by Stephen himself, about black holes led to something called the holographic principle. What was the holographic principle, and what is the holographic principle today? It's the idea that a region of space with everything in it, it could be astronomical space, it could just be this room, or even the whole universe, that the information encoding everything taking place in this three-dimensional world is encoded on the boundary of that region as a kind of quantum hologram. It's of course impossible for me to describe the mathematics of the quantum hologram here, I won't try, but that's the message. And again, things are not where you think they are, or at least things are not where the information which is encoding them would lead you to believe they are. Okay, let's come back now to this idea that gravity and quantum mechanics may be so closely related that they really are just two sides of the same coin.
I'm not sure where I wanted to jump
The
to next
evidence for that is a whole bunch of parallels between gravitational phenomena, we'll talk about what that means in a moment, and quantum phenomena, things that we had no idea were connected.
What I might
Things
do is skip
from
this
two
'cause
radically
it's a
different
little
fields of
overly
physics are turning out
technical stuff.
of that three-dimensional world. You know the equation F equals ma,
So
of course.
he talked about the
Side is something so radically different
gravity,
that
and
it's hard to
then
imagine
he
that there's
talked
anything to do with it.
about quantum
you
systems.
put-
Again,
Like an
I'm going to share the link.
size of
Do
an
check
epidemic.
yourself.
The size of an
And
epidemic
they
simply means the number of
found
sick people.
That
And the
the
number of sick people has a tendency to grow.
equation for the
Here's
speeding
an
up
example for the experts on quantum
something in
computation.
gravity
If there are any, anybody know about
was
quantum
similar to
computers?
the momentum
Nobody.
of the
Good.
spreading
Okay.
of,
Then this
in the
do
quantum
an
fields.
example.
This is
It
not
comes-
something that I
The
understand.
interior these things, and the calculation
And it's not something
is exactly equal
that
to the
we'll just look at this just for the sake of the point of showing what this video was about, and if people are
What do you
interested in
find?
looking more.
You find that the rate of change of size in this setup is exactly equal to the mass of an object which was created at this point times the gravitational acceleration. These quantities here you get from elsewhere, but they're well defined in the context. And what does it say? Well, what would gravity say? Gravity would say that the time derivative of the momentum of the particle that's falling is equal to mg. And
so there we go. The talk is about quantum gravity, but it's not gravity quantized, but seeing that actually loads of the mathematical equations are kind of seem to be in parallel. This is not something I understand, but I find it fascinating. The link is there if anyone wants to listen to the talk. It's really interesting, but it sows some seeds which we can play with in our little thought experiment. And there's increasing reasons to feel that it's okay to do that, that we're not messing with anything which is deluding ourselves, but we've collected solid information from as good a sources that we can find, as in, science. Obviously, science is only a theory right now until the next person comes along and makes a new model and it supersedes the old model and science has taken a big step forward. But we must also remember that where we're at in our own head is kind of a model of how we think the world is, built on our belief systems and the way we perceive the world. And sometimes those things can cause us suffering, and sometimes those things can be pleasant. So for the sake of well-being, this is the playground, this is the experimental ground upon which we turn our attention and our efforts, and we try things. We hypothesize about maybe if I think the world is terrible and everyone's out to get me and everyone's always against me, the pressure of the world, and I'm never going to get anywhere, maybe if I take that view, I'll be really happy. And then we try it, and the guys watching this, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, you will know well that is a clear example of something that is not going to work. So always being prepared to admit that our hypotheses are incorrect, and learn and grow and try new things. There's no perfecting it so far as I know. Obviously science is working very hard to perfect its knowledge, and it's constantly learning and growing, so I'm certainly not going to try and claim that I'm there. So let's jump in with what I think is the last point before jumping into this thought experiment.
Okay, let's come on to black holes and paradoxes. It was a famous paradox of Stephen Hawking's. I'm going to oversimplify it, not just Stephen Hawking's paradox, but a later paradox called the firewall paradox. Please, if you're a theoretical physicist, don't shoot me for the way I explain this, because it's going to be oversimplified. The black hole paradox. We have a black hole. The horizon of the black hole is simply this circle here. And we throw something into the black hole that has some information. An encyclopedia, and I'm going to call that Encyclopedia A. There's no escape from a black hole, or at least as far as we knew in the 1990s, there is no way that anything can escape from a black hole, but the black hole can evaporate. That was something that Stephen Hawking discovered, that black holes can evaporate, and they can shrink. At some point, they shrink enough that something strange happens. Namely, there is not enough information, enough area, enough whatever it is in that remaining black hole to encode the encyclopedia that you threw in. It's called a page point, and all of a sudden, the encyclopedia simply cannot be there anymore. Where is it, or where are its bits of information? They're in the Hawking radiation. So the encyclopedia gets transferred, or the information of the encyclopedia gets transferred to the radiation. That's a quantum mechanical principle that we've known about for a long time. And if you take that radiation, imagine somebody takes that radiation, grabs all the photons, puts them in a box, and squeezes that box down into some small box somewheres, then what this is telling us, the quantum mechanics, is that the encyclopedia, again, I emphasize that by that I mean the bits that comprise the information in the encyclopedia, is transferred from the black hole to the radiation, or to the black hole that the radiation might have been compressed into. In other words, as the black hole shrinks, it cannot hold any information, and if it can't hold any information, nothing can fall into it anymore. And one says that there is a firewall at the horizon. Firewall doesn't mean in the sense of burning up. It means in the sense of an information firewall, that no information can fall into the black hole anymore. Every time you try to do so, it pops out and it appears far away in the radiation. That's the idea. Now, this idea of a firewall was very, very badly at odds with what we knew about general relativity. General relativity always said that you can always put things into the black hole and they will simply stay there.
To see the link
So,
between the
this led to this paradox, the so-called firewall paradox. We could say it this way. Either there is a firewall, or we'll sometimes call, Raphael, were you the inventor of A equals RB? I think you might have been. Yes, I think he was, as a matter of fact. The idea is a generalization of the holographic idea that things are not where you think they are, and that in fact, the encyclopedia, which is in fact behind the horizon of the black hole, but its bits of information are found far away in the Hawking radiation. Don't worry about what A and RB stand for. What it says is that the information comprising the thing inside the black hole is far away on Alpha Centauri in some other system. In other words, it's an extreme version of this holographic idea that things are just not where you think they are.
Well, there we go. That is a barrage of information, and it was through watching these full videos that I contemplated them and played with the ideas which were shared. So what we're going to do now is experiment with our thought experiment with the use of the very technical paint. And I'm going to try and explain to you this idea that we can play with to challenge our perceptions. So picture this. You are about to be blinded by my art skills. I shall warn you. Here we go. There's a person. And so we're all people. And how can I draw this? The fundamental idea in this thought experiment is that what's outside is an illusion, and anyone who has any interest in non-duality and Advaita Vedanta would have come across this idea before that, it's got some additional little steps as we move towards the end of this thought experiment, which I thought made it worth sharing in addition to the knowledge which is already well and truly out there. And I'm going to say again that I'm not sharing that and the science because this is the way it is. I'm not making any claims like that. I'm just saying that it's a thought experiment with some kind of backing to kind of legitimize putting the effort into running the thought experiment and entertaining these ideas, because I need convincing and other people out there may need convincing before experimenting with their sense of self in this way. And I look to science, a lot of people in the West look to science. That's why I'm doing it the way I'm doing it. That's a reminder of the disclaimer. So, with the outside being considered to be a hologram or an illusion or a hallucination, really we're experiencing our own minds, our perception. And so ordinarily we think, it would seem to us, that the outside world is out there, light bounces off it from the sun, which is also very much out there and solid, and the light bounces off and goes in through our eyes, and we experience directly what is coming into us from outside, from the outside world. And this thought experiment, however, is to think about it in terms of a projector inside our minds, behind our eyes. And rather than the outside world being experienced coming in, what's really happening is that what is inside, the perception, is being projected out from inside. And this is where the more spiritual paths and understandings can be brought in, to, rather than, let me take a step back from there. If we were to accept that, if you're sitting in a room now and it's just an empty room and just yourself, and you can look at a wall and think that's being projected from me out there. I'm not looking at a wall out there. That's in me, projected out, the appearance of the wall. If it's come from within and being projected out, then in some sense that wall is me. The hologram, the hallucination, the illusion is coming from me, projected out, and it is me. So that's the first step of the thought experiment, is to quieten down, take a moment, and I'm doing it here now as best as I can as well, and thinking the wall and everything around me is me. Apologies if you can hear some noise. That is a neighbour, I think, cutting the grass. So this is where the more spiritual paths and philosophies can start to be brought in as an overlap, that a projector shines from a light bulb here, and so you could imagine it to be that the outside world is being illuminated from the light within, is illuminating the hologram. And it overlaps really nicely with that idea of a hologram as well, that the external 3D world is an illusion, and it's the light being shone on it that creates this 3D world as we experience it. But really it's not out there. And to overlap this with the points that were made in the talk about the location of the information, for this thought experiment I take a huge detour from what the scientists were saying in the talk, that the information is stored on the external boundaries. Actually, the information is stored within. I'm not going to define what it's within, because frankly I don't know, and sticking a label on it doesn't really work. But the illuminating light from within, in our little projector inside us that projects out, is also the source of information. And the example was given of the encyclopedia that fell into a black hole, and that being considered to be information. Another word for what you have in an encyclopedia is knowledge, and here we have another big overlap with spiritual paths, including Buddhism and non-duality, about the knower, identifying with the knower, the source of knowledge, that which knows inside, which can be considered awareness and consciousness. Doesn't matter what you want to call it. For the sake of the thought experiment, it's just the knower is inside, illuminating and projecting outwards, and creating this experience in the external world. It starts to get complicated when you look down or at your own hands and you realize that this body is in the external world. It's being illuminated by, it's in all the senses. It's not just the light as well. The light shines out through the ears to illuminate and bring into existence the sound waves, smell, taste, touch, everything is there because of the illuminating light of, you could use like consciousness, awareness, the word doesn't matter. Whatever's right for you. This is a thought experiment. We have new viewers, welcome. I'm going to repeat myself one more last time and say, this doesn't mean it's real. It's a thought experiment to play with. So what matters most is what works for you, what words you want to use and play with, and see how this affects your perception. You have to ask then, if that light that's projecting out, if the knower and knowledge and information that's projecting it outwards is illuminating the presence of a solid body, then what is the light and the knower if it's not the solid body? The solid body and appearance of the solid body is also part of the hologram, not of the source. Another word that overlaps with both the idea of the information, the source of the information, and the more spiritual paths. At this point, if you can start to, I don't find it too hard to think, for example, this pen, and see that and think, that's me. I'm projecting out a pen, because it's just a lump of, if you want to go back to the duality perspective of observer object, it's a lump of matter out there. There's nothing particularly special about it. Where for me it gets super interesting and challenging, this is where I've lost the people that I've explained this to previously. Why don't I add to our little drawing here, else our So here's our pen. Okay, it's a black pen. That's fairly straightforward. It's a lump of matter. Okay. Now, what happens if you are, even with sound, the comings of goings of sound, why is it not there? Then it's there. So for the pen example, I see the pen. So it's like, it's me, I'm seeing the pen. The pen goes when I close my eyes. The pen's not there anymore. The change happened because I shut my eyes. But what happens when what happens when a little dog comes in? The dog in this example, and the worst picture you've ever seen, is I'm going to zoom into this a little bit just in case. In case. 2 seconds. I need to move my doggy. I don't want it to get done by the compression on YouTube. That's a very small dog because the pen is the same size. The dog's a long way away. So the dog's moving. The dog is itself a projector. It's having its own experience, and it has its own awareness of what's going on around it. It has its senses, its eyes and its ears, its smell. It is as well projecting. And what's it projecting? What else in the room is also animated in the same way? And the answer to that question, if I'm sat in a room and I'm on my own and a dog walks in, the only other thing that is animated is me. If the source and the light that shines out from me is the source of the 3D hologram, the source of the 3D universe, then, or at least the source of experience in it, I don't want to raise the philosophical question of is there or isn't there a material external world, although that is exactly what we're about to do. But for the moment, pick which one suits you best. That source of knowing, that source of projecting in this way is miraculous, and the dog shares it. And you could suspect that the source of me and my projector is in fact the same source of the projector in the dog, which is to say, to choose to identify with the light from the light bulb, and rather than the body, because the body has been seen to be illuminated by the projector, as in anything which is illuminated is a hologram. It's the hologram. It's a hallucination. It is an illusion. And this body is, so what isn't? What do I identify with if I'm not the body? I identify with the light shining from the projector, illuminating everything. And the dog seems to have the same miraculous illuminating happening, the same ability to be animated as I do, can move around, see things, take things in. It has its own perception. The light, we can theorize and play with the idea of being the same light. So while I can sit here and think, if this empty room is projected out from me, then on some level the wall that I see is me, because it's come from me and been projected out there. That light that shines out of me and animates me, differentiating me from a wall, is the same light shining from the dog, which is to say, to see the dog is also to say, that is me. So now we're at the level where the inanimate objects around me are me, projected out, and even the animated objects are me. And I was playing with this idea, and it was really just like blowing my mind, basically. And I have experienced some kind of insights from non-duality before when I practiced a lot more, but it felt good, it felt peaceful, it felt safe. And I was walking home from taking the kids to school, and this lady looked at me with a very kind of either suspicious or angry or whatever was going on with her that day. I have no idea. But it just got to the point of thinking, I was thinking, that's me. And I was thinking, the light that shines from her and illuminates me is tainted by something that is, for whatever reason, because I'm just crossing the road, I'm not doing anything to bother her or anything. For whatever reason, she had a frown on her face, and the light that was shining through her was being influenced by something it was illuminating in her, including thoughts, including feelings. It's illuminated by the same light. And I got to thinking that it's very much like that inside everybody, including the dog, is a prism. And that light shines through the prism, sending it off. Do you know what I should do? I'm going to undo that one. And we all have a unique prism. And that light shines off different directions, different colours. Now, like I say, this doesn't mean that this is what it is. It's a thought experiment that we're playing with and entertaining for the sake of challenging our perceptions and how we see the world and how we see ourselves, and the place that we identify, particularly in terms of non-duality, the identification with an observer as separate from the object, the external world. And this light obviously would really be inside the projector. That belongs in there. You know what I'm going to do to show that it's not going in through the eyes. This is where that lives. And that light illuminates not just the external world, but much of our changing internal world as well, including thoughts, including feelings. And the feeling, if we're feeling absolutely miserable, then everything we see outside, it just seems like it's a bad day. Like the outside seems grayer, other people seem more miserable, and nothing seems to go our way. It's like the light has shone into the prism, which has scattered the light and been projected outside, and we experience this outside, when in reality it's us. And I realise that that prism, as explained in this thought experiment, is in line with a explanation of karma. Karma being just the way I'm going to explain it here, the way I think of it is cause and effect, causality, which is understood in science to mean how things move, for example, how the planets move, and but the word karma being applicable to causality in the internal realm, including thoughts, feelings, perceptions, beliefs. This is backed up by cognitive behavioural therapy, where they believe certain things are caused by something. For example, a phobia could be caused by a belief. That belief can be erroneous, which can cause behaviour which is not in keeping with reality, purely because it was caused by a belief, and the belief makes it real. It's part of the prism that splits the light in some certain way. So understanding our karma, understanding energy that we're putting into things to make things a certain way, from this perspective becomes important if we want to see things differently, but also just appreciating, okay, today I'm seeing the world this particular way, I'm seeing the hologram this particular way, the illusion this way, and the reason is because it's come from inside. The light is being split and scattered in such a way that that it just appears this way. It's not anybody else's fault. It's not outside. It's just the way it is. And you can work on acceptance. You can work on holding it as it is, accepting it as it is, identifying with the light rather than the thoughts and beliefs. And if you can hold that in silence, it can burn itself out. That's really a topic for another day. But in some ways, this is all a massive amount of reasons which we are acknowledging aren't necessarily real, to just start looking at everything and saying, that's me. That wall is me. The important thing is it's coming from inside outside. And let's look lastly at the video by Rupert Spira. It's an example that he gives, basically we've looked at the science behind the idea of the perception being coming from inside, and our experience perception of the outside world is actually more to do with us and our minds. Let's look more at the non-duality. It's strongly starting to suggest that there is not really an external world, that it's coming from something inside and outside. And then there's questions about how it's shared with others, and these kinds of philosophical questions which are super interesting. But why don't we jump in to an extract of a talk by Rupert Spira about this argument between an external material universe or should I say, whether that comes from inside, with consciousness being the foundation.
Let's say you were to... Oh, where do you live?
I live in
So he's in an argument with someone who wants to understand, but they're a scientist from
Okay, so let's say you're
materialistic background.
you're at home in the East Bay, and you fall asleep one night, and you dream that you're attending my retreat at Burlingame.
Okay.
And in this dream, it's the first morning of the Mercy Center retreat, and you find yourself sitting in the second row with the mic in your hand asking a question.
Okay.
In other words, in your dream, you are dreaming the exact experience that you are having now.
Okay.
It's quite possible. You could have a dream.
Right.
Yes? So, in your dream, you and I are talking with each other. And I am trying to suggest to you that everything appears in awareness. And you are trying to tell me, no, the sun over there obviously appears independent of my mind. Well, it may seem to be outside your finite mind, but remember, the entire contents of your dream is taking place in your mind asleep in Burlingame, in East Bay. How do you know that we are not now having a kind of dream, and that each of our minds are not appearing within and made of the same indivisible field of infinite consciousness? Just as all the images and thoughts that appear in your individual mind are made of, appear in, and are made of the same indivisible field of your own mind.
I think you made a very, very strong argument. I couldn't refute your argument at this moment, but my...
So, that is another extra perspective from someone who knows way more than me on questioning the validity, in question this perception of the external world and the identity. And all of this has come full circle to the video that I opened this talk with about Vedanta's got it all wrong, there's a shitload of selves. Rupert Spira there mentioned the small mind. Where I'm at is that there's a lot of talk in non-duality and Buddhism and all these spiritual paths about the sense of I am and the very first identification, and I'm not there. I'm not able to still myself enough to go back to that point. And there is a feeling that it's not here, I'm trying to get something that's somewhere else, or that for some reason it doesn't apply to me, or it's missing, or something like that. But every single one of us, when we say I and when we say me, are referring to it. So I think that this thought experiment has worked so well for me over the last week, apart from recently when it is overwhelmed by, for me, the quite bad pain I've been in sets everything off in me, and I fully revert back to what could be considered, normal, everyday human experience. But with things calming down, without being so overwhelmed by pain, referring to me and I must be referring to that original sense of I am, even if I don't know it, even if it's so fast and automatic and potentially entangled with other things. it must be there. So by looking externally in my experience, by sitting down and saying, I'm going to try this, and then saying, that wall is me. The wall I'm looking at behind the camera here. I don't need to be at that place for the word me is referring to that. I know that I'm having a human experience, and I might not be able to identify exactly what it's referring to, but when I say that, it rings true that I'm talking about the right thing, and it challenges it when I say that wall is me. There's something I can feel very much inside tied with this me thing, drastically challenged by saying that wall is me. And I'm starting now to be reminded of the experience I had when I continued that over to other life forms. When I was playing with this idea, and I was like, that is just started to feel completely in awe, to just perceive it as so beautiful. And I was walking down the stairs and I heard my girlfriend's daughter moving around in the kitchen, and I was like, there's me, there's life moving around in another form. The light that shines through me is shining through another human, and on some deep level it's me, and the whole 3D thing is projected from me, and I didn't know what it was going to do. It had its own life, and she came shooting around the corner and ran past me and was like, hi, and ran up the stairs, and I was like, there's me. That's amazing. Like, when I just say me, it's something I can't find. I don't end up there in meditation, but it's there. It's so fundamental and so, I can't find the words, profound and important and beautiful. And to witness that moving around without just sticking a label on of, the dog, the kid, the woman down the road with the grumpy face. Because you see someone looking at you with a grumpy face, and it's so easy to think, what the hell is she looking at? What's her problem? And completely miss the miracle of, like, there's a living thing illuminated by the same source as me, but it's shining through different thoughts and feelings and experiences and memories, and that has shaped her into this form which today has a grumpy face that happens to be looking at me, but it can't be anything to do with me, because I know that on this unbelievably deep level we're the same. I'm feeling connection and frankly love with that person, and for whatever reason the light is just shining through a prism that for her is creating some unsettling thoughts and feelings and emotions. I think it's a really, really powerful thought experiment. Where this is more useful for our usual conversations is in that how we perceive the world, how the beliefs and experiences and memories that we have when we're young really do form our perception of the world, and often that perception causes suffering, particularly if you entertain the idea that what we're witnessing outside is actually an illusion or a hologram, as quantum physics is suggesting, and or this field of science where they're trying to fit quantum physics and gravity together using the model of the hologram and having some success. The success is what lends some weight to its validity and the suggestion that perhaps it's definitely something to contemplate anyway. And if we're choosing to put some importance on our own well-being, which we all naturally do, we all want to be okay, we all want to be happy, want to be content, we want to have an experience of the world that feels good. And for lots of people that means go to the cinema, play a computer game, hang out with friends, go on a night out. Those experiences, yeah, they're nice, but what do you do when the internet goes down, when the power goes down, when your friends are all busy? Particularly for anyone that's experienced mental health, any mental health challenges, and frankly I don't know how many people there will be alive who've never experienced some mental health challenges, even if it's just feeling lonely, feeling disappointed, feeling heartbroken. Like, most people go through these things, and there'll be some time in the day, perhaps in bed late at night, perhaps just getting home after school or work and no one's home, and you just get hit by this experience. How does one remain with good well-being and content in those situations? And by taking a look at these deeper things, we can completely change our perception and reduce suffering in our lives. And how can that be a bad thing? That's what I'm all about, and this is all about. And guys who join, who watch, thanks very much. I hope that hope you enjoy it as well. And let's work towards good well-being. That's what this is all about. Yeah, I had I don't need this now. I had been, a lot of it is subconscious, and my practice hasn't been good enough to not be overwhelmed by the pain of my tooth at the weekend. That's just starting to pass, and I'm just starting to calm back down again. And it shows the importance of continually allocating some time to do whatever it is for us, which helps to calm things down, as well as a key component, I believe, or is taught, really. It's not what I believe, because I've got limited experience, but is taught in these self-inquiry traditions that still in the mind, still in the feelings. I don't know if it is in Buddhism, or whether I just think it works that well. It works like that for me when I follow the Buddhist teachings, but is that the karma, or the energy that's there, the things that are going on, for example, thoughts continually popping into the head, rerunning of the past, feelings in the body, that a lot of that can be karma, and habit was probably a better Western word, that these things keep happening and they have a momentum about them. So when one sits to meditate and they sit down and try and just be quiet, this stuff pops up, and it's literally popping up from momentum. It's not that, particularly if one was to think, often the teaching is, sit down and don't think of anything. So you sit down and you try, okay, I'm not going to think about anything, and then 2 seconds later you're like thinking about something. It proves that thought didn't come up because we wanted it to come up. We didn't think it up. It just appeared, and it's almost like momentum throws it up. And by letting momentum throw it up, we have no choice about that. If you're trying to meditate, or just take a quiet minute, reflective minute, have a cup of tea or whatever it is, it is there. You can't. If I make it worse, you add more. You start thinking about the fact that you shouldn't be thinking, and we're back at the multiple selves thing. There's the self that chose not to think, the self that started thinking, and the self that got angry at the self that was thinking when it shouldn't have been thinking. And you've got 3 separate selves arguing amongst themselves, within 10-20 seconds. That is the skill and wisdom and insight, is learning how to still and quieten ourselves, because and the word meditate really, and to meditate, someone says I'm going to learn to meditate, they get told sit down there and don't think, just be quiet, just watch your breath, and they do it and they're thinking the whole time, they feel uncomfortable and they think I can't do it, I'm rubbish, and give up. But the instructions are for like the end state, the idealized state, which is borderline impossible. And in trying to do it, one fails, and the question is, why does that fail? And you have to address some really quite big questions like, do I think my own thoughts? Did I think that up? And do I need to respond to that thought spontaneously coming up with being annoyed at it and telling it, stop thinking? Does that work? And obvious answer, as we talk about it here, is very obvious that the answer is no. Being angry at oneself for thinking is just an extra thought, and it's a more high energy thought probably as well. So what do you do then? Well, if you can witness that there are 3 selves created within 10-20 seconds, you can witness quite easily that none of them are real or are solid. They are arising in conjunction with other causes. So frustration that I'm thinking, why am I thinking I shouldn't be thinking? Boom, there's a self there that correlates with that. It's a new moment, which is why there was an opportunity for the reaction. You can go backwards in meditation, and you can't go backwards, but you can think what happened just before that. And the more mindful we get, the more present we get, the more aware of what came before, of what caused things to come up. Things that, okay, I'm feeling frustrated that I'm thinking, and then you can try and respond more calmly, more. In Buddhism, this is where loving friendliness, loving kindness comes in, of just accepting it's okay, I give you permission to fail at not thinking. And that has to be so, because the truth is that they come up from momentum, or what is karma. It just throws these out. And the point of that is that when we respond with kindness, that momentum has been used, a certain amount of energy has been used to throw that up out of habit, and energy diminishes. We know that's science. And if you use energy, it's not there. Now, the momentum, the thought will pass, but that hasn't used up its entire fuel tank of momentum, and these things do come up again. But when they come up again, particularly if we have used wisdom and insight to recognize that they're just temporary, come up, whatever, it's okay, come up, and then they fade after time. They get weaker and weaker and weaker as they use up their energy. And it's very similar to adjusting and changing and polishing that prism that I spoke about in the projector within ourselves, that the light shines out from, and it shines through this prism. And rather than trying to change oneself, because we've just seen that perhaps the self is a little bit questionable in terms of whether it's a solid real thing or not, instead of trying to change ourselves or force ourselves to do things a certain way, that we can just let these energies come and go, let them weaken, let them burn themselves out, and given time, the prism can adjust and perhaps return to a more normal, neutral state, rather than, because we all have difficulties in our lives, we all have very challenging times, we all have experiences that trouble us greatly, and we can, and baggage, we collect baggage as we go through our lives, and this process of reflecting on that baggage, be that could be counselling, that could be cognitive behavioural therapy, whatever it is, or it could be meditation if one is so inclined as to look in the spiritual paths, or self-reflection, this path of self-reflection, and can calm that prism down. And then not only are we calmer inside, but what gets projected outside, what we perceive in our experiences, can become improved. In the same way, you know, I took the extreme example of thinking everything's terrible and everyone's out to get them, and that colours our experience of the outside world and makes us feel like we're alone and everyone's out to get us, and it becomes a very unpleasant experience. By letting karma burn out, by, you know, smoothing out and polishing that prism, we can change our perception of the world and literally change our experience, literally improve our experience to leave us in a place of far superior well-being, of a place where there's less suffering. Thanks everyone for joining, and those who commented. Carl asks again, and yeah, I will see you guys soon. Have a good day and enjoy your weekend. Take care.